Folks, and welcome to The Farm, a podcast dedicated to synchromysticism, parapolitics, and high weirdness in all its many forms. This is your host, Recluse, aka Stephen Snyder, the longtime curator of the Visa blog and author of the recently released A Special Relationship: Trump, Epstein, and the Secret History of the Anglo-American Establishment. This is our subscribers section, so you guys know all the websites by now. So, for the first proper show for the subscriber sections, I decided to bring out one of my favorite people in the whole wide world. He is the author of Our Gods Wear Spandex, The Secret History of Rock and Roll, and the novel He Will Live Up in the Sky. And of course, he is the longtime curator of The Secret Sun, and more recently, the subscriber site Deep Pearl Diving. Folks, I give you guys the great Christopher Knowles. Chris, thank you so much for dropping by again.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right. Today, Chris and I are going to be covering something we are both highly passionate about, and that is Chris Carter's Great Millennium series, which ran from 1996 until 1999. Obviously, it didn't garner the kind of attention Carter's earlier series, though something called The X-Files did. And that's a real shame, but not entirely unsurprising. Millennium was so far ahead of its time that I think we've needed nearly 2 decades since it went off the air to fully appreciate it. And really, it wasn't until 2020 that it truly came into its own. Millennium is the most 2020 show around, even if it wrapped up in 1999. We are going to use it as a prism for understanding parapolitics in 2020 as how it applies throughout the show. So let's get going. Okay, so for those of you unaware, Millennium centers around the figure of Frank Black, played by the great Zern veteran Lance Henriksen. Frank is a former member of the FBI's famed, or infamous, behavioral science unit with an uncanny ability to profile serial killers and other monsters. Whether Frank's ability is psychic in nature or simply the result of his uncanny intuition is left up in the air for much of the first season, though the former is later embraced as the show went on. Now, as the series opened, Frank has relocated to Washington State with his wife and child. He's recovering from a breakdown that forced his departure from the Bureau, and now he consults for the Millennium Group, a shadowy private entity. And that seems like a good place to open things up. Now, the Millennium Group, it's effectively a private intelligence company. Now, while these things are pretty commonplace nowadays, this was pretty novel in 1996. Now, Chris, can you take us through the inspiration for the group and how this is one of the many things the show got so right in terms of the shape of things to come?
Well, the original impetus for the group is there is a group of FBI consultants former FBI consultants called the Academy Group. And the Academy Group were people from behavioral sciences who were consulted on, serial killer, spree killer, really serious cases of killers, prodigious killers with a lot of victims. And they, were just basically used to profile crimes and criminals and so on and so forth. And they had some sort of contact with Chris Carter. Chris Carter had some sort of contact fairly early on with the FBI, because at first blush, the FBI didn't want anything to do with him. They said, "Who are you? We don't care about this. We don't want anything, we don't want to get involved. This looks like something that's not good for our image." But at the same time, according to Dean Haglund, who played Langley in the Lone Gunman, there was CIA people kicking around quite a bit from before the show was even aired. There were people sort of insinuating themselves into the mix. There's one famous story that Chris Carter was at a party and there was some CIA fortune teller. Yes, there are such things as CIA fortune tellers. And, she told him that, the show would be a hit and it would be good for his career and all these kind of things. And then there were always people visiting the set, and there were people who, who would tell producers and directors, what you're doing here isn't really that far from reality. So that was, interesting kind of thing. I wonder if those are people like Jim Semivan and Luis Elizondo and so on and so forth. But so the Academy group was the original inspiration, and in the first series, the first season, they're real. That's pretty much who they are, and they're really almost kind of a nebulous entity. In the second season, they become sort of like this quasi Masonic secret society with roots back to the Middle Ages. And then in the third season, they sort of just become, every secret entity, everything from, Wackenhut to G4S to you name it, CIA, FBI, uh, every group that you can name of, DynCorp, whoever, you just go up and down the list. They seem to be just like, bad government secret entity people. So, yeah, it was fascinating to sort of watch that evolution, because, they do start off just pretty much as simple criminal profilers. And, to be quite honest, not really terribly interesting in the first season. It's not really till the second season that they sort of take shape as something a little more colorful than just random ex-FBI guys.
Yeah, it kind of seemed at parts in the first season they didn't even really know entirely like what to do with the group. Yeah, but definitely that did change as the show advanced. Like I
Yeah,
said,
yeah, I mean, they really do. So here's what happened. So Chris Carter was basically running two shows and working on pre-production on the X-Files movie, which shot in the summer following the fourth season of the X-Files. So he was just basically killing himself. Just completely exhausting himself. He and Frank Spotnitz. So they had told Fox that we can't do this again, and Fox had hired Glenn Morgan and Jim Wong, who were two sort of early writer producers on the X Files, and they split off for a short-lived series called Space Above and Beyond, which I always, I liked it.
yeah, I
First,
did too. I did too. I was
it's
about to
just
say I always
it's
thought that was really underrated.
but it's just basically Starship Troopers. So,
But it came out before Starship Troopers, didn't it? I mean,
well,
at least the Heinlein adaptation or the adaptation from the 90s, right?
yeah, but it didn't come up before that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously not before the Heinlein book. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I mean, it was good, and a lot of those they'd used they'd written episodes for all the stars, like Kirsten Cloak and Rodney Rowland were featured in episodes in the fourth season of the X Files, and then James Morrison and Tucker Smallwood were featured in Millennium episodes. So they sort of they promised them when the show was canceled, listen, we're going back to 1013, but we'll use you guys. And then James Morrison later came back in the seventh season of the X Files. So it's interesting because the dynamic between the two series, that when X Files was, I'm sorry, when Millennium was canceled after the end of the third season, um, a lot of those actors who sort of were in and out, whether playing guest star roles or Millennium Group people, whomever, they they eventually were in and out of X Files episodes. Actually, starting with the sixth season. So it's just an interesting dynamic because Chris Carter's a guy who he really values loyalty, so he would use a lot of the same actors over and over again.
Yeah, kind of seems like it was passed on then to some of his subordinates. But yeah, no, definitely, I did appreciate the some of the space above and beyond people being brought in, especially Christine Cloak. Of course, she married Glenn Morgan, right?
Yeah, well, that's a whole other story.
Yeah, yeah. I guess we don't want
She
to.
was, yeah, I mean, she was, she was basically his mistress, and he had written an episode that a lot of X-Files fans really, really hated, called "The Field Where I Died,"
Mhm.
and he was very upfront that he wrote the episode for her, and fans were very, very upset because it sort of diminished Scully quite a bit, and this is sort of when the shipper movement was really picking up quite a head of steam. So yeah, but it's, hey man, it's Hollywood. But he's been with her ever since. I mean, it's interesting too because the one of my favorite Millennium episodes, Dead Letters, um, even though it's credited to Morgan and Wong, it was written by Jim Wong, and it's very much Jim Wong kind of writing about how Glenn Morgan was becoming sort of a difficult guy when he was divorcing his first wife. So if you ever watch that episode again, there's a lot of that. I mean, those guys. I mean, all these people were always writing this sort of backstage dramas into their episodes. I mean, that's a whole other kettle of fish. I mean, I could tell you some stories, but I don't think I'm really at liberty to. So,
All right. So, how about like just the whole climate that kind of prevailed around the time Millennium, came on the air for some of the younger listeners? I mean, obviously the 90s, it's been pretty romanticized, especially by millennials. But I mean, it was a pretty paranoid at the time. And the United States seemed like it was born with the cults, militias, other fringe groups. You had the ever present Y2K apocalypse meme that the Christian right did so much to stoke. Can you just kind of give us a rundown of some of those different threads and the influences that it had on the show, specifically the first season?
well, there's a lot of things going on. I think that a lot of it really starts in the early '80s with the farm foreclosure crisis. So what you really had is that you had a lot of independent farmers basically being forced out of business. And then we had the Farm Aid concerts in 1985 and so on. So I mean, it really starts there with the and just the start of deindustrialization. Where
Yeah,
we have,
the rise of the Rust Belt, effectively.
yeah, exactly. So you have a lot of working class people just being forced out of good paying jobs, good paying union jobs, and the jobs are being sent to wherever, Guatemala or Vietnam, Sri Lanka, wherever, you're having offshoring and stuff. So that's starting to create a lot of social unrest. I mean, you always had sort of like the groups like the Order uh, and some of the Christian identity groups, but they were, pretty fair. They got a lot of press, but they were, fairly marginal players. And what happened with the rise of the foreclosure crisis and deindustrialization and so on is that starts to feed into the militia, the militia movement. And the militia movement really starts off, um, as an extreme right movement. The whole idea of the lone wolves and so on. And but it's all just being churned up by all this tremendous economic chaos that's sort of being visited on the, particularly people in the Midwest and the Central West, those states like Colorado and so on.
Yeah, really
I know the
fertile
Order.
recruiting ground.
What's that?
It was a really fertile recruiting ground. I mean, I was kind of thinking also like the Dakotas and stuff with Gordon Call and a lot of those kind of peoples too.
Yeah, but also, I mean, even like states like Idaho
Oh yeah,
and and Oregon as well. So the thing that really lit the fire, though, was Iran Contra. So we had Iran Contra scandal break after the 1986 congressional elections, and with the rise of um, ham radio, small press, you also had the beginnings of sort of the bulletin board services on the dial-up internet, you're starting to have sort of this alternative media coming up, and it's just the whole Iran-Contra thing just lights, it's just like a kerosene pouring on a fire. And then we had the things like Promise and the Panama situation, and
Oh
then
yeah,
of course
collapse at BCCI.
yeah, BCCI, and then of course you have the Gulf War, and then also Gulf War syndrome, right?
Well, also to the election of George H.W. Bush too, because the far right hated him probably even more than the left did. Honestly, it was
Oh, yeah, absolutely did. But yeah, because George W. Bush is an interesting character because he's really part of that whole saddle shoe, Brooks Brothers, Rockefeller, Republican coterie. But they were sort of sensing, I guess, in the late 50s, early 60s, that power was moving west with the rise of the oil barons. So he relocated, right, to Houston and starts Zapata, which is just basically a giant money laundering operation. And a lot of people would argue that he ran the JFK snuff operation, and so he's a very sinister character, and the entire family are just up to their necks in all kinds of chicanery and monkey shines, so to speak. So yeah, the election of Bush is a huge issue, and then of course Bush comes out on September 11th, 1990, and talks about the New World Order. He gives the New World Order speech to Congress. So that is just like, you might as well just, you know, it's like just kicking at a hornet's nest, It's just the whole thing just really blew up. So then we have, but the interesting thing that's also feeding to this is that people like Bill Cooper, because Bill Cooper is very much involved in that kind of fringy militia stuff that you see like in the Central West and the mountain West. But also he's really heavily into the whole UFO thing. So then he writes, I think it came out in 91, was Behold a Pale Horse.
yeah, 91.
Yeah, and that was all she wrote. I mean, from there on, it was just one thing after another. But the interesting thing too is that there was a really significant left conspiracy culture that is kind of forgotten now. Because when the neoliberals and the neoconservatives took over the Democratic Party, they really any section or faction of the left that they couldn't control and use as like as either useful idiots or agent provocateurs, they really crushed. So I mean, I remember
Yeah, I was going to say,
listening to.
I mean, you can kind of think of like Ministry on the flip side of the coin, because I mean, they did the, what was it, NWO song? I mean, effectively sampling like the Bush speech. I was kind of thinking of like a left wing criticism of that, so to speak.
Well, but here's the thing. I mean, my immersion into conspiracy culture was left. Gary Null on WBAI, Michael Levine also on WBAI, Dave Emery, whose show was on WFMU, some other people, I mean, and also like, zines, and, like Robert Anton Wilson was sort of enjoying a resurgence at the time. So there was a pretty active, I guess it would all sort of
kind of the 80s counterculture in a sense.
Yeah, I think it would be inspired originally by Mae Brussell, but there's definitely a pretty prominent and active left conspiracy culture. And to be honest with you, and another guy who was sort of popularizing this was Richard Belzer, because Richard Belzer was doing a lot of Howard Stern.
Oh yeah, he went on to have connections with disinformation, right?
Yeah, so disinformation sort of grew out of that. Research grew out of that. it was pretty active, and there was a store in New York City called See Here, and it was basically just a fanzine and small press outlet for books and magazines. And there was a lot of a mock press, Adam Parfrey. So there was a really active sort of counterculture or left conspiracy culture that I think just really just got shunted aside. Um, and I have always seen Bicep as the inheritor of that mantle,
Oh,
because the too is very much in the same spirit as what I would see as conspiracy culture. Because really, I mean, conspiracy culture was seen as inherently left. The mainstream Republicans hated it.
yeah, I
There
mean,
was
I was going to say you could even kind of go back to the early JFK researchers, I mean, kind of Peter Dale Scott and what have you. I mean, that was really sort of the foundation of modern parapolitical stuff. So even sort of going back to like the 60s, 70s, you had that sort of tradition of left wing, conspiracy research.
well, yeah. I mean, a lot of it's driven by Vietnam, and a lot of it's driven by Watergate, right? So it's the funny thing though is that by '96, it's really starting to wane because I think that the breaking point was Oklahoma City. After Oklahoma City, I think that the left counterculture conspiracy, factions were I don't want to say they were intimidated, but it was kind of a wake up call because there was a definite effort on the part of the establishment press and the media and of course the intelligence agencies, to really put a lid on this stuff. So I think after Oklahoma City, and obviously the show in question, Millennium, is premiered well after that, a year and a half after it. But by then, see what also happens is that the early '90s you had the recession. So on top of all these things with like the election of Bush and the Iraq War and the sort of the fallout from Iran Contra, and then the continuing deindustrialization that really starts to pick up speed, as the '90s proceed. But by '96, you had the economy was getting a lot stronger, and there was a sort of a baby boom, where we start to see a lot of the millennials enter the world, so to speak. So, alternative rock is definitely on the way out at that point in time. And you start to see the rise of, like, I mean, the big album in '96 was Hootie and the Blowfish, right? But we also had, I guess this would be a little later, but Britney Spears and Backstreet
Yeah,
Boys and
the rhythm of
Sank,
boy bands. Yeah, yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So the culture just really is starting to shift away from that kind of darkness, and this, I think, hurt Millennium.
Yeah.
The other thing that hurt Millennium is just that it was so dark and violent. And I think that a lot of people watched the pilot and just said, oh, I cannot. I mean, that there's some stuff in there. I mean, that movie would have been a hard I mean, that show, if you just took that show and put it in a movie theater, the ratings board would have given it a hard R. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that was some really dark stuff in there. I mean, people being set on fire and having their faces sewn shut and all sorts of crazy stuff. So I think a lot of people just tuned in because the X Files was really peaking in its popularity at that point in time, and just said, "Oh, I just forget it." No, I mean, I mean, a great example is my wife. I mean, we used to watch X Files every week on Friday nights, and it's funny because everything we watched was on Fox because we watched like Cops and America's Most Wanted, but we also watched Sightings and we watched The Simpsons and
Yeah, they
all
had
these kind of
some great stuff in the '90s, and I mean, some
yeah,
of the
the
leading shows too for the X Files at times were really great. Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. What was it, BR5, I think.
there was a lot of it was very much a sort of a try anything kind of network,
Mm-hmm.
and but you also had well, I guess a little later you had Malcolm in the Middle, but Beverly Hills 90210 was still real popular, and Melrose Place and everything. So it was very much
Oh yeah, and then in Living Color, Married with
in
Children.
Living Color. Yeah, I mean, it just had a much younger, more irreverent, more vibrant kind of feel that I think was just very much in tune with what Gen X was looking for. But again, so we watched the first one, and she's just kind of like, I don't know about this. And then we watched the second episode, Gehenna, and she's just like, forget it. This is too upsetting. It's too stressful. And then we skipped the next couple of episodes, and then we watched, the one that's sort of a takeoff on the whole Atlanta bombing situation at Centennial Park, that the movie Richard Jewell is made out of more recently. And, we watched that, and she was just like, forget it. Like, no, I'm done. No, it's just like, I don't think she watched another episode of that series after that. She just was like, I cannot watch this. Because man, it was really dark and upset. And, especially, with all these film techniques that they're doing, those sort of quick cuts and the overexposure and everything, it's always screaming and, I mean, that stuff is it's pretty rough. It's pretty rough stuff. It's not the X Files is, the X Files could get very dark, but the X Files is always fun. I mean, the
Yeah.
X Files always has that element of play to it.
Mm-hmm.
And Millennium was not. Millennium was like,
It was very serious, and I mean, even when they tried to bring humor into Millennium, it was very awkward.
well, it's funny because I always see like, the X Files is kind of like, it's kind of like Catholic Mass, right? Because there's a lot of pageantry and a lot of color and just a lot of, um, the priests are all gay and everything. So
Yeah,
it's all, there's a kind of like
rough
pageantry about it, and to me, like,
Millennium
Millennium is
is more
kind
like
of like,
a Protestant
it's like,
type thing.
yeah, I mean, it's like the fundamentalist Presbyterian, where you just sit in a room and you feel terrible about yourself. So, you know, um, yeah, I think that, I mean, again, I love it, but one of the things I always say is that the X Files you can binge on, right? You
Hmm.
can just go, oh, I'm just going to watch this entire season tonight because I'm just feeling it, right? You can't do that with Millennium. I can watch one episode at a time because it's that confrontational. I need to just sort of,
Yeah, some of those
okay,
episodes are just really draining.
yeah. So I think that, so in answer to your question, I think by this point in the cycle, I think that Millennium just came too late in some ways, but I think also it's very much ahead of its time. It's very much ahead of its time because as soon as it's over, you start to have a lot of shows that are basically aping a lot of its moves, and I think they built an entire franchise, the CSI franchise, and all the spin-offs. And I've watched, those some of. I mean, I think CSI is horrible, but uh, it's so clear that this is very heavily inspired by Millennium.
Yeah.
And right up to the present day, I mean, that the guys who did Mindhunter, which I loved, and I'm
Mm.
very disappointed they're not continuing with it. Um, you know, we're digging Millennium, which is ironic, because Mindhunter is David Fincher, and David Fincher's really sort of, Seven is very much the touchstone for the first season of Millennium. Um,
Hmm.
and I think that kind of to its disservice, because one of the things that people talked about with Millennium is that it was like the serial killer of the week, right? And it was always just these like pasty schlubs, um, serial killers, right? Because that's serial killers are mostly just losers, right? So it was just like one, parade of losers, and it all just became very exhausting to watch. It's just very draining. But interestingly enough, I mean, you have a lot of really, really great episodes that are breaking that mold. But again, it's too dark for 1996, 97. It's just too dark. It's not in touch with the mood of the culture.
Yeah, no, I could absolutely see that. Um, like I said, let's get into the Legion myth arc right quick. It's kind of stealthily introduced early in the first season, but it's not really until the end of that season that it kind of starts to come into play. Or I should say, it's introduced, I guess, stealthily early in the first season, but it's not really till like the end of the first season that it's kind of finally comes through with what it's been hinting at throughout the first season. So anyway, what's your take on that?
Oh well, that word is never used. That was a fan invention. So the fans of Millennium came up with that phrase, Legion, because there's a character who really can't be argued as being part of Legion, which is just demons in human form. And just to give you a bit of context, I mean, I've always really believed that the impetus for this storyline was the Prophecy movies with Christopher Walken. So those movies are basically one of the earliest kind of examples that you see picked up in Millennium, and I think you see really taken to the bank with Supernatural. So the whole idea that angels and demons are taking human possession of human form and kind of playing out their dramas on Earth. So Legion would be like the devil, but you really don't get a sense of this, unless you're sort of inferring or reading something into it that I don't think the writers intended. But until the episode Lamentation, which introduces the Lucy Butler character, played by the very strange and alluring Sarah Jane Redmond. So that was really the kickoff of the whole Legion storyline. And I think that the Chris Carter really intended that to be the mythology. That was going to be the mythology of the series, was these angels and demons sort of acting out in the world by taking human form. And in the second season, the Millennium groups, that mythology starts to become more prominent, even though the Legion mythology is still present, because we have another, very well-regarded Lucy Butler episode, A Room with No View. And then we also have sort of the goofy version of that with Somehow Satan Got Behind Me, the Darren Morgan episode. So that this is meant to be the equivalent of the X-Files mythology with the syndicate and colonization and so on and so forth. I mean, if you really look at it, it's just basically kind of that same idea played out just through a more theological point of view. But at the same time, the X-Files did plenty of those kind of episodes as well. They did plenty of like episodes that you could argue are like Legion tie-ins. Revelations, All Souls. There's just a bunch of episodes. Horizon. A bunch of episodes where the
Kind of
very much the
especially
same
early
idea.
seasons.
Yeah. So Legion is, again, it's something that fans developed on their own, because it's never spoken of within the season, but it's just it's characters like Lucy Butler and Al Pepper and all these kind of people who are basically demons taking human form or possessing human beings.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Now, let's briefly touch on one of my favorite episodes from the first season, and that is Force Majeure. This
Mm.
one's this one seems to introduce a lot of motifs that would later become big in season 3. It revolves around apocalyptic cults the group is interested in. As a twist, this cult is largely comprised of cloned human beings created by the founder. What's more, the group uses the curious figure of Dennis Hoffman, played by the great character actor Brad Dourif, to track down this cult. The character, as the name implies, is clearly based upon Mr. Twilight Language himself, Michael A. Hoffman. So, what's your take on this episode, especially in light of some of the storylines that get going in the third season?
Oh, I don't believe it's based on Michael Hoffman.
Oh, really?
No, I don't. There's a character in the X-Files in the 7th season called Micah Hoffman, and he's based on this this guy named Mark Hoffman, and Mark Hoffman was a Mormon who was also a counterfeiter and a forger, and had forged a lot of fake, LDS documents and scriptures and stuff. So, and he's actually still alive. He's in prison. I think that Dennis Hoffman is based on him. I don't believe it's based on Michael Hoffman, Michael A. Hoffman, I should say, because he's. I just don't believe he's based on. I mean, I could understand why you might assume that, but I just don't believe that that's the case. I think he's based on Mark Hoffman.
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. I mean, I'm not as familiar with Mark Hoffman. I mean, also I was kind of struck a bit by the look too. It seemed a little bit similar to kind of the nerdy persona Michael A. Hoffman tries to put out.
Well, Michael A. Hoffman's very he's very oily and sort of, you know what I mean. There's something Michael A. Hoffman is always just projected just a sort of a just very kind of smarmy and smug kind of persona. And I think that the Dennis Hoffman character in Force Majeure is much more true believer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Saying.
He's
Yeah,
not nearly as cynical, I think.
yeah, I kind of see what you're saying with that. But okay, did you have any other insights into the episode though?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic episode. It has Sarah Strange in it, who was in the Dwayne Barry episode of the X-Files, and I think she was like 18 when she was in that. She's a great actress who went on to do some Canadian television. There's a series that I'm very fond of called Da Vinci's Inquest that she was a co-star in. So that whole thing with the and it's ironic too, because the prophecy of the planet's alignment, the great syzygy, that actually happened. That actually happened on May 5th, 2000. There wasn't any noticeable, nothing came. You didn't see what they were talking about in the episode, floods and earth change. Earth changes was a big thing at that time. That was a big thing on the internet. Earth changes.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of becomes the focal point of that episode. But it's just a really interesting. There's almost kind of like a Children of the Damned kind of vibe to it too. But it's also the idea of cloning and genetic engineering, and sort of almost like a pre-CRISPR.
What about Mormonism? I mean, especially when you brought up the possible connection to Mark Hoffman. I mean, I was kind of thinking it goes into a little bit to sort of the obsession with genealogy and what have you too.
Well, see, that's the thing. Is the whole thing with Idaho. I mean, Idaho's a big Mormon state, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just the whole thing. And, the whole thing with the Ark, the Mormons are really into that whole mythology. I mean, they were obviously into a lot of pop, but they're, particularly interested in that kind of.
Just in general survivalism. I mean, it's kind of like general preoccupation with the church. I mean, I think a lot of members, it's just a way of life, usually stockpile food and whatever, the way we would usually associate with survivalists.
Yeah. So, again, I get a very, plus, like the whole stereotype of Mormons is they're all like, they're all
Blonde hair, blue, yeah.
yeah, like they're all just like just stereotypes. Like there used to be back in the Wild West days of the internet when you had stuff like mullets galore.
Oh
There
man, I
was
haven't thought of that in years. Oh my
yeah,
god, so
yeah.
funny.
There was also a website called Hot Mormons too.
Oh
So
really?
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's still. I guess maybe if you went to archive.org or whatever, you might be able to find it. But yeah, I miss those days. Believe me,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
miss
yeah.
the hell out of those days.
Oh shit, you got me make me want to do a search now to see if Mullets Galore has been archived. Oh my goodness, takes me back to the old metalhead days for sure.
Yeah, that was a hilarious site.
Yeah.
And that guy was very, very nervy. Oh, it's still online.
Oh sweet.
Yeah. No, wait, it's been switched off. Yeah, it's just an index page.
Oh oh
But
wow.
that was a. I mean, and then I guess E-Bomb's World might have taken up the slack here. So yeah, but boy, those were, and that was Mullets galore. I mean, I remember reading that, when Millennium was on, right? So there you go.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, those were definitely the days. All right, now you've kind of alluded to how the group went through quite a transformation from the first season to the second one. And it was also revealed that there were two factions within the group, the Roosters and the Owls. Now, while probably not intended, this provided a shockingly nuanced take on how the elite power structure probably really operates. Now, can you take us through those factions and the inspiration the Wongs were mining for the group's transformation?
Right. So they did a great job in kind of creating a more interesting Millennium group than what we had in the first season. Some of the episodes I'm really not crazy about. Like one of the episodes that I just really hate is Hand of Saint Sebastian.
Oh,
Even though,
yes.
but it's funny. Even though it seems to me that it's kind of that gets into your neighborhood with like the Order of Saint John and so on, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are sort of it did kind of plays into sort of the weird mythology with it. we'll get into that a little bit, but yeah. Now, the one that actually always drove me nuts was the one that was based on the Moravian bloodlines or something like that. When they go to see the girl at the school,
Oh, I
and
love that one,
oh,
Amnesis.
really? That's funny.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's I don't really think it's like a guilty pleasure. I just really like that episode because I was so into that stuff at the time.
That probably explains why I never really got into that. But yeah, on the flip side of the coin, I can kind of see why the one about the hand of Saint Sebastian would kind of resonate with me. But anyway, that's interesting.
Well, there's also in that episode. This is going to sound like a complete and total stupid thing to say, but there's an actress who is really just basically a glorified extra in that. An actress. Let me just find her name here. Kimberly Warnock, and boy, she is ridiculously cute. Like I said, that's a little bit of a side note. But the other thing I like about Amnesis too is that John Piper Ferguson is in it, who is also in one, my all-time favorite X-Files episode, Christmas Carol. And I remember when I interviewed Chris Carter, and I asked him about John Piper Ferguson. He said he was part of the family, and I think they were always sort of trying to figure out like if X-Files had stayed in
Vancouver.
Vancouver, if they had done more shows in Vancouver, I think you would have seen him show up as a lead. And listen, I cannot attest to this. I don't have any kind of paper trail on this, but I believe that episode, Christmas Carol, I think that was like an audition for him because at the time David Duchovny was really making a lot of trouble. That's when you're sort of forcing the move to LA. And one thing I know for sure is that a lot of people were very unhappy about moving to LA. First of all, because it made the show much, much more expensive and
Hmm.
much more, difficult to produce because, I mean, you know how it is getting around LA, right? So I strongly believe that was an audition for him. And uh, I mean, I don't know how serious they were about replacing David Duchovny. I mean, there was talk. There was a lot of talk at the time on the internet. So when Chris, the Jeffrey Spender character shows up, um, there was a lot of talk that he was going to be the new Mulder, and they were going to switch it around where Scully would become a believer, and he would be
The skeptic, yeah.
the skeptic character. So I definitely think that because at the time David Duchovny was doing a lot of reshoots for the movie, and I definitely very strongly believe that they were like, well, let's see how this guy is. You know what I mean? Let's give this guy a shot. And he's playing like a police detective. He just transfers to the FBI. Whatever. We'll figure it out. But I do know, I can't reveal my sources on this, but I have two different sources from hearing from two different people inside the operation that there was very serious talk about recasting. That they really didn't want to leave Vancouver, and they were, to be honest with you, everybody was kind of getting a little sick of David because he was fighting with Jillian all the time, and he's going off to do these really terrible movies like Playing God and stuff. So I think that there was definitely like an idea of, well, let's why don't we see if this guy works, right? Let's try this guy out, and I think he would. I thought he did great. I mean, like I said, it's my favorite X-Files episode, but I think he would have been really good. He never really. Uh, got like that starring role, but he's also in a great, great, great Millennium episode that I friggin' love called "The Wild and the Innocent."
Which
Do you,
season was
you
that
know
one?
that episode I'm talking about, "The Wild
Which
and the Innocent"?
which season was it in?
First season. It's the one where the girl is sort of I don't know if I want to give any spoilers because the ending is really kind of part. It's part. If you want to watch the episode, the ending is kind of part of the whole.
Oh, is it the two chicks that escaped from
Yeah, that's Excelsior's Day End.
yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah.
this is
No,
the one
that's a
the girl and her boyfriend, shove the John Piper Ferguson character into the trunk and then just drive across country.
yeah,
It's,
yeah,
it's kind of
yeah.
like their version of Badlands.
Yeah, 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 yeah. No,
You
that was a
know,
really
you
good
ever see
episode.
Badlands with
Yes, 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 yes. The what
Martin
was it,
Sheen
Terrence
and
Malick or something that directed it? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
so
No,
I
that
think that was kind of their version of Badlands.
yeah, no, that was a really great episode. Yes, that's a fantastic ending.
Yeah, so again, I think that John Piper Ferguson probably was one of the guys that they were really looking very seriously at for a starring role. And I again, I can't swear by this, but the Pinocchio character in Harsh Realm, I believe they were looking at John Piper Ferguson for that as well.
And that was the one DB Sweeney ended up playing,
Yeah,
right?
TV Sweeney. I think John Piper Ferguson dodged a bullet because that's a fucking horrible show. So I mean, like I just really just that is just awful. I don't know if you've ever watched Harsh Realm, but
Oh yeah, I've seen Harsh Realms. I've seen all the Chris Carter stuff.
it's really bad. But ironically, it's again, this is like Chris Carter's mentality. So with Harsh Realm was originally this like really stupid comic book, and you can look it up. You can look it up online. It had absolutely nothing to do with the series that was produced, and but this whole idea of like just get everybody online so you can totally control them, sounds a little familiar, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Shut everybody in their houses and get them in this virtual world. Uh, some might argue that that was a little, a little prophetic. Who
Yeah,
knows?
no, definitely. I mean, I was thinking it definitely, well, it wasn't executed well. I mean, I think the concept, especially in this day and age, would, be pretty compelling.
Well, the thing is that it was at the wrong time. So
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was like, again, like everybody was just really exhausted, because they did like 5 seasons of X-Files, 3 seasons of Millennium, and they did a movie. It was just like everybody was just completely burnt out. So I think that the Harsh Realm was just, it was at a real low point for the operation. But the thing that really bothers me, is that since Millennium wasn't really doing well in the ratings, Chris Carter just decided, that he was going to let Millennium go and then sort of take a chance on this new show. But I think that was a terrible mistake, because I think that Millennium was, whatever was doing in the ratings, I think that creatively, by the end of that third season, I think it really hit its stride. So it's kind of upsetting that it didn't ever get the chance to.
Yeah, no, I see what you're saying because I mean, really, the third season was just it was so strong. I mean, even compared to a lot of like the latter seasons of the X Files as well. I mean, possibly really with the exception of season 8 or something. I don't know if there was another season of the X Files after the Vancouver era ended that was quite as strong as the third season, at least in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting too, because I always felt when they cast Robert Patrick, he had like a different vibe from Lance Henriksen, but it's almost like they were like two sides of like a Clint Eastwood kind of coin. So Lance Henriksen's very much sort of like at the time he's doing Millennium, he's sort of like the older, wiser, more grizzled um, Clint Eastwood, and Robert Patrick sort of comes across as like the
Maybe
Magnum
more
Force.
younger one. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So I loved the John Doggett character, but it's funny too. So Millennium gets canceled, right? But one thing that I told Chris Carter, and one thing that a lot of people complained about. So a lot of people really didn't like the second X Files movie, which I friggin' love, and everybody said it was too much. It was a Millennium movie with Mulder and Scully in it. That was basically what people said about that movie,
Hmm.
and I was like, yeah, and right, but the thing is that whole '90s sexy vibe had just totally been extinguished by the end of the Bush era, right? The
Yeah,
second.
yeah, yeah.
Uh, the thing that I always say is that Chris Carter always has the ability to seize the zeitgeist, but the problem is that after that whole '90s zeitgeist, seizing the zeitgeist that people don't want to be reminded of, right? People don't want to be reminded of the zeitgeist. But I think it's interesting because in that movie, you could just picture, even the way like Mulder dresses, you can just picture Frank, right?
Yeah, yeah, I could
And
see that.
yeah, and that sort of carries over into like the revival seasons, particularly that first episode. Um, you that we that could just, if you took out the spaceships and the aliens and stuff, that very much reminds. I think that's very millenniumistic, that episode. And I think that was, I think it's an interesting thing. So Chris Carter invented the X Files, I think like in '91, around there, maybe '92. And, he's a young guy working for Disney. And, this is like, you're still in that tail end of that '80s go-go Hollywood era, like on the tail of like the Batman movie and so on. And, he's a younger guy and he's just a little bit more starry eyed, right? But I always thought that like the Mulder character and the Frank character are the same character. They're both Chris Carter's alter egos, but the Frank character is like, the guy who's just seen the way the world really operates now. The Mulder
Yeah.
character is still like, oh, we can change the world. Let's just keep running around and chasing after the truth. And the Frank character is just like, the Frank character is the guy who just produced 3 seasons of television, and you're in the belly of the beast, the Hollywood beast, and you're dealing with like people at Fox and just that whole disaster area of just corruption and venality, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think I think the interesting thing. I mean, I remember getting back to this whole Millennium thing. So I was a huge fan of X-Files season 8. I remember watching that season every week and just I was just so blown away by it, and I was just so into it. And it was oh man, they after a couple seasons where they're dicking around with the comedy and stuff, it's oh man, they got back to basics. And then in the 9th season, I remember I watched that episode, Demonicus, which is lit. I mean, they even have the Ouroboros in that. Do you know that episode?
No, I'm not as familiar with season 9. It's just
Okay, just watch season 9. Watch the episode Demonicus and just go, okay, this is like Frank and Lara Means, or
okay.
Frank and Emma Hollis, right? Whatever you choose, because you could just take the exact same story and just do a deep fake change of the faces and the voices. It is a Millennium episode, and I remember watching that and thinking this is sort of in the post 9/11 era, and everybody's just sort of freaked out. And I was just like, what? I don't need to watch this anymore. This is just too Millennium for me. And then I skipped a bunch of episodes, and then the episode I watched after that was the episode Underneath, which is also just a straight up Millennium episode.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. It kind of seems like Carter was never really able to let it go.
yeah, see, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. I think that so, aside from all the weird science elements and stuff, I just think that Millennium was just very much more him, as a mature man. That I think it was just much more a
Yeah, yeah,
reflection of who he had become.
yeah, yeah. No, I definitely see what you're saying with that. Um, all right. So anyway, let's get into season 3 because I know we both love that one. It's your favorite one. It's my favorite one, and just it's jam packed with so much parapolitical and esoteric significance, much of which is never even really explained in the show. So as to the later, one of my favorite subjects is the metaphysics of decapitation. In Masks of God, Joseph Campbell indicates that the skull cult may be the oldest form of religion, even predating Homo sapiens. Traces of the skull cult have been found among Neanderthals. And of course, it underlines one of the oldest known rituals, that of the headless one, which a certain Gordon White is quite taken with. Now, the 3rd season of Millennium has 2 episodes that directly allude to this, the aptly named Skull and Bones, but also Darwin's Eye. Now, could you take us through how the skull cult mythos is kind of woven into these 2 pivotal episodes?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm just going to say that I think the Skull and Bones, the Skull and Bones comes from Freemasonry, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
Right.
mean,
But I've got I think that I've sort of cracked the Freemasonic code. This is something that I've been working on that I haven't really been posting on, but I've been working on cracking the code of the tracing boards and so on. And I'm just I just it freaks me out. So I think the Skull and Bones is not like the Baphomet John the Baptist kind of head. It's something very specific. But in that episode, which I friggin' love, and anybody who's listening to this, if you haven't seen Skull and Bones, just go on Daily Motion or something and just look it up,
yeah, it's
because
just
it
amazing.
is it's the truth. It's just it is. It's the world. You know what I mean? You watch that episode and you're just like, oh, okay. Because the whole thing, it's about silencing dissenters. It's about getting rid of people who don't even realize they're dissenters. People who just they just think, well, if this guy keeps doing this, he might end up doing this, and this is going to be a problem for us. So let's just kill him now before he gets too far along. That is a phenomenal episode. It's so scary because, again, I mean, it's real. Like, the Chris Carter's thing is like, it's only scary as it's real. And like, I've never been afraid of like vampires or Frankenstein or aliens or any of that kind of shit. That episode
Yeah.
scares the shit out of me because it's so real. It's just like, the Ari Gross character, just like, he's just the guy who like was kind of living his life and just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time and
Yeah,
see
yeah,
the
and
wrong
it totally
thing. And
changed his life. Yeah.
it just totally, just completely changes everything for him, just totally fucks everything up. And he just becomes obsessed with it. And, oh, God.
Well, it's also, I mean, I love how they have the symbolism in that, and I mean it, but it's subtle, you know. I mean, they don't really go out of their way to draw attention to it the way that they wouldn't, you know. A lot of times this kind of stuff is depicted because I mean, besides the skull symbolism, they also showed the all-seeing eye, I think, in that episode too, right? But like
No,
on
no,
the sun,
you're
it's
thinking
you
of,
see it like in the two-parter with the remote viewers, obviously
right,
early
yeah.
in the season, but then you just kind of subtly see it, I think, on that wall at one point in that episode. Uh,
Okay. I think you're right, actually. But yeah, that's a phenomenal episode. And just, anybody who studied like parapolitics, particularly in the kind of depth that you have, and anybody who's read your blog all these years, I mean, you're just going to watch that episode and go, this is not fiction. This is a docudrama. You know what I mean? Or this might even just be a flat out documentary. I mean, it's just the way things operate. It's just people just are in the wrong place at the wrong time, or they're looking into the wrong thing, and they don't even realize they're doing it, and that's the end of it. So that is oh God, that's a phenomenal episode. But Darwin's Eye is another one, and it's interesting too because Darwin's Eye kind of flips that. Darwin's Eye is a great episode because it sets you up and it throws all these like conspiracies at you, right? And all the symbolism, right? I love that episode because it just totally undermines your expectations. It's the symbolism of the the palm trees, right? And the decapitations, like you said,
yeah.
that whole symbolism. And then, you have this character, um, Tracy Middendorf character, who's like, she's really cute, but she's, crazy. And, she's probably like really good in bed. And, like just like any kind of young red blooded American male is just going to, he's going to follow that like the moth to the flame. But that is and I love that Blur song that it starts with too. I mean, that's it's just such a weird choice, but it's so perfect. But it does, but it ties in like that, like you said, like this whole idea of the decapitation and stuff, and that's like a meme that I've been looking at quite a bit on The Secret Sun lately. As it pertains to Medusa and Algol. But then it's just, and then you go, it's kind of like, it almost seems like a tie into that because it's the eye and the head, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it shows you all these things, and throws all these potential conspiracies at you, and then by the end it just totally upends them, and just like, this is just somebody who just is seeing things, patterns that aren't there. You know
Well,
what I mean?
it's kind of interesting to me because like at the two episodes, I mean, they both sort of like hint at the skull cult, but from like a different perspective. Where like in Skull and Bones, you know, there's sort of the illusion that this is sort of an institutionalized thing within the group, a kind of subtle use of the symbolism of it. But then in Darwin's Eye, like you're saying, there really is no conspiracy. It's just an adoption, really, I think, at a primordial level almost, kind of showing how like it resonates at like even a subconscious level there. So it's just, I don't know, I just find it such a fascinating contrast between these two, and that in the season, it's just one of the things that's so great about it.
Well, the thing that I also love about Darwin's Eye is that it also like the whole idea, the idea, one of the things that just drives me crazy with like the Q stuff and the Pizzagate stuff, where it just becomes so fixated on the pedo stuff, right?
Hmm.
But, you can't research anything to do with conspiracy or politics without running into that at some point, right?
Hmm.
So, I mean, it's definitely there. It's just like the fixation on it that
Well,
you
you could
see.
even, see too how like that whole incident, I mean, depicted in Darwin's eye would become something that would almost fixate, in the latter generation. I mean, the Q-bots and what have you. Because I mean, on top of that, she's molested by her father, who's a military intelligence
Well, that's
officer.
yeah, exactly. That's what
This would be exactly the kind of thing that they would spin into an elaborate conspiracy, even though it's really not.
but it's interesting though, too, though, because in this case, it's not in that it doesn't lead to anything pertaining to the case. But I think the interesting thing about that is that like this, so this girl is molested by her father. He comes back from the Gulf, and his head is just all screwed up from everything that he dealt with over there, and then he just kind of takes it out on his daughter, because he comes home and she's like a woman and she's sexy, and he's fucked in the head. But I think that speaks to the mentality of people who are involved in intelligence work. I think a lot of them are just really seriously fucked in the head. And I think a lot of see one of the things that I try to argue with people, and in particularly a lot of the I'm not going to say like the Q or the Pizzagate people, but like more like kind of like a little earlier, like more like the Alex Jones kind of thing, where like the elites are all these like superheroes, and it's like
Yeah.
one of the things I try to say is like, no, they're not. They're just fucking evil, and they. But one of the things that I've posited, and you've probably read me posit in the past, is like, okay, so we know these people are evil, and we know they're crazy, but what if they're also stupid, right? Like what if they're also just like they're so tied up in these fantasies that most of which are just not even their own, like they've inherited them, from
Yeah.
whatever.
No,
Fuck.
what I've always said, I mean, I think that's a big part of like the purpose behind, I mean, the kind of conspiracy stuff that's, promoted by a guy like Alex Jones. It's to make the elites seem invincible when they're really not. And like you're saying, I mean, I don't even think they're, nearly as smart. I mean, as a lot of this kind of propaganda depicts them as being frequently. I mean, they're really not. I mean, just look at the world around you if you don't believe
No,
it.
yeah, I mean they're not, and I think that one of the things that always drives me crazy, it's like, oh well, if conspiracies were real, then we'd know about them. Yeah, well we do, you fucking moron. Like a Bill Maher kind of type saying stupid shit like that. Well, yeah, well that's what we're talking about. We do know, and here's like this and that. That's just like one of these like gaslighting CIA bullshit things that people say, and people repeat. I don't even think they actually even believe these things. They repeat them because they just don't want to get involved in the argument. But so I think that I really do think in a lot of ways that even if it's not specifically tied into the caper, that's the term that they use, the writers use. It's always the caper. What's the caper? In Darwin's eye, I think that it's like the deep background, because one of the things that sort of connects a lot of people who are in intelligence work, but also a lot of people who are this whole rise of like pedo culture on the internet, um, is that they're both nerd things. You know what I mean? A
Yeah.
lot of nerds, a lot of people in intelligence work are nerds. It's kind of like an unspoken thing. But the pedo culture is also very nerdy, and it always has been. And I've known about this my entire life because I was involved in fandom. So you always got a sense of like, don't talk to that guy, stay away from this. It was very much like a kind of awareness that, but it's all part of a very nerdy kind of culture. So I just think that was very well rendered. And even though they're trying to subvert your expectations, at the same time, they're kind of drawing to a greater truth about the milieu that they're exploring.
Yeah, no, I see exactly what you're saying with that. Okay, so another individual episode that's great in season 3 is The Sound of Snow.
Oh,
This one features one of the most compelling storylines involving subliminal messages. One is apt to find on TV or really anywhere. So, I mean, how about that one?
I mean, where do you start? See, my take on this is that this is part of like that Legion storyline you're talking about. So I don't know so this is all about the subliminals and the use of different kinds of signals embedded into recordings to manipulate your view of reality. And this is taken straight. The X-Files did a lot of stuff like this. One of the episodes that I think really ties into this pretty well is an episode called Wet Wired. And
Yeah, that was a great one.
Yeah, it's very much the same. It's the same concept, but my take is that the character, the Alice character, is some sort of supernatural being. She's either a demon or an angel, and probably like an angel, because this whole thing of like the idea of judgment. That these recordings are sort of like what do they talk about? Is that the episode where they talk about St. Peter's Gate?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Anyway, but so there's that whole idea. So one of the Chris Carter was raised a Baptist, and working class family, Baptist, probably pretty stark in the morality. So I think that had like kind of a lasting influence on him. And I think you see it here because it's the whole idea of this being, and when they analyze these tapes. So if you haven't seen the episode, let me just bring people up to speed. So it's this woman is making these tapes that she embeds with these signals in the pink noise spectrum, and they create these imaginary scenarios in people who have guilty consciences. So in the teaser, there's this girl played by the absolutely lovely Deanna Milligan, who feels guilt over her boyfriend drowning in a frozen lake. So she sort of replays that, and then she ends up getting hit by a truck. So the concept, and then Frank gets one of the tapes, and we know, if you know the series, that Frank is just riven with guilt over the death of his wife, with the Marburg virus and so on. So I think that very, very interesting tie-ins there with the milieu of sin and redemption, the kind of Baptist Calvinist worldview that I think Carter, was very influenced by when he was young, before he started taking acid and surfing. No, that's pretty much the story right there. I mean, you're raised in like this kind of strict working class family with this kind of unforgiving religious tradition, and then you go and you take a lot of acid and you surf. I mean, that's pretty much that's the story right there. That's all you need to know.
Okay, so how about Collateral Damage?
Oh,
This one, contrasts real world cover-ups versus conspiratainment. I mean, it's brilliant, and of course, it's got a guest spot from the great bullshit artist Art Bell himself.
Well, this is real. Again, this is the whole zeitgeist thing
And that
because
was he also had Art Bell had the bandana on his head, right, with the skull and bones on it in this episode, didn't he, at one point?
did he? I don't know if I remember that. I'll have to rewatch that. But so this is really the heyday of Art Bell, right? And this is around the time, a little bit after, but after his notoriety from his connection with the Heaven's Gate thing. So if you don't remember that story, he had another bullshit artist called Ed Dames, fake remote viewer, who said that his viewers had seen like a UFO was following the Hale-Bopp comet, and it's going to be like a massive sort of Independence Day kind of event. And then Marshall Applewhite happens to be tuned in that on that program, and he thinks that it's the Starship Enterprise coming to take him and his away team away, and they just have to leave their earthly vehicles, and so on and so forth. So very interesting tie-in. But this is Art Bell at the height of his fame and influence. But he was also friends with Chris Carter. I mean, Chris Carter was on his show a number of times, so very timely. But another interesting thing about it is that the character, the main character, is played by James Marsters, who was just sort of at the beginning of his fame as Spike on Buffy.
Yeah.
He at this point he's still just a recurring character. He's not. He became basically a co-lead by the time the series was done. So he's just basically a recurring character, and very interesting timing again, like very zeitgeist. And it's fascinating to me that it really hits these zeitgeist bases, even though people really aren't paying a lot of attention at this point in time.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was just so far ahead of its time.
But
And
but here's the other thing though, is that around the time this episode was being written, there was a scientist from Dallas, actually a doctor from Dallas, who's writing in. He actually testified to Congress about the whole Gulf War syndrome, um, and these particular weaponized microbes that are showing up in the blood work of people who are complaining of Gulf War syndrome. There's a lot of debate. Some people said that they thought it might have been the depleted uranium, but that exact episode, the exact storyline, the exact story that we see in this episode, Collateral Damage. So just to keep, again, people might not be familiar with the series, but these two special forces guys who had been institutionalized after the Gulf War kidnap the daughter of one of the main members of the Millennium Group, to blackmail him into confessing to carrying out germ warfare experiments on U.S. soldiers during the Gulf War. But the whole scenario was being circulated on Alt Conspiracy at the time. Maybe a little before, maybe a year before, but not too far before all this. That the exact scenario that they're describing in this episode was, circulating in one of these sort of anonymous screeds that you would see on Alt Conspiracy or Alt Conspiracy Militia, or just, one of these kind of groups, which just really fascinates me because, again, this entire season, this is like where the 1013 guys took all these books that, all the stuff that they were reading, Covert Action Quarterly, and, all these sort of samizdat underground press things. You talked about Hoffman. They definitely pulled plot lines straight out of secret societies and psychological warfare in this season. I mean, just all the really deep, dark stuff, the stuff that they could never get away with on X-Files, like the stuff that they just couldn't do
yeah.
on X-Files. They were doing in this season. and I know Chris Carter was real. He was getting into some really crazy stuff. As far as his reading material, and it all just comes out in this season, and that's what's just so fascinating because all these things that were just sort of speculation back in the late '90s are very much sort of, you
Yeah,
know, they've
becoming
either
a
been
reality
either
increasingly every
become
day.
exposed, yeah, or they're becoming our everyday reality. Exactly.
All right, so that brings us into some contemporary times then. Okay, so the second season of Millennium ends with what appears to be a viral outbreak that ends civilization as we know it. Either the group is behind it or allowing it to happen by inoculating select individuals with vaccines. But then at the beginning of season three, we learned that the outbreak was massively overhyped by the media, and it was contained within Washington state, and that most people died from the panic resulting from the alleged viral outbreak rather than the virus itself. Probably goes without saying, but that's pretty damn relevant in 2020. So,
Mhm.
just how relevant is it then?
Oh well, it all depends on the way you look at the world. I think it's extremely relevant, to be honest with you. But the whole idea that there's this huge panic about this worldwide contagion that just turns out to be a lot of hype and scare tactics. I don't know. That might ring a bell with some people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was just amazing. I mean, just how relevant it is. Not to keep overusing the word, but especially also even too though. I mean, it breaking out in Washington State. I mean, obviously Washington State has really been at the heart of the zeitgeist in 2020. I mean,
Well,
especially
that's where the whole, yeah, I mean, that's where like that was the first ground zero at the nursing homes.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
the nursing homes, I mean, that's X Files. If you can remember your X Files history, the whole thing with the tests on the old ladies in the nursing homes with the biological hybrids and
yeah, yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? How a lot of things that we are kind of seeing in the news today are very much prefigured in the X Files. So there you go.
Yeah. Or in this case, Millennium. But
Exactly.
all right, so at the beginning of season three, we have a two-parter featuring the episodes The Innocent and Exegesis.
Exegesis. Yeah.
Exegesis, okay. This is some of the best hour and a half of TV one is likely to find. And
Oh
frankly, I mean,
yeah.
it's as good as any, movie you're probably going to find too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I
It's
mean, if you cut this together, this would be like a really fucking great movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty much the best fictionalized account of remote viewing program, honestly, that's ever been made, at least in my opinion.
Oh wait, are you talking about the opening or the closing?
The two-part opener.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the closer is good too, but yeah, yeah, the two-part opener here. Maybe I got the titles confused about that. But
The
anyway,
opener is the first is yeah, the Innocence and Exegesis, and then it's Via Dolorosa and Goodbye to All That, which is the ending.
yeah, 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 yeah. Okay, all right. Now, um, okay, so there, as far as remote viewing goes, there's generally two competing camps over the perspective of it. One is that it can be, pretty much anyone can be taught to remote view. It's just a matter of training. The other is that while the masses can be taught some rudimentary remote viewing skills, there are only certain unique human beings with the talent who are talented enough to really generate practical results. Now, the two-parter seems to depict the logical conclusions of the second camp. Here, an especially gifted remote viewer appears to have been used to sire a whole family of psychic soldiers for the program, but now the program has been ended, and the women produced by it are getting impressions of the group's plan for a manufactured apocalypse they're still plotting. There is so much to unpack here, at least about the notion that genetically unique human beings that have certain gifts are being essentially bred effectively. And this is a notion that's, in vogue again with works such as American Cosmic, where, it hints that a lot of these same characters that have been involved in UFO fields do believe that multi generational experiencers, have some kind of genetic anomaly and so forth. these same people were also involved in the remote viewing program back in the day as well. So, just in general, what's your take on this just brilliant hour and a half of TV?
I don't know where to start. I've done a lot of posts on it, and it's just one of these moments in time that tales are being told out of school, and on a show that's ostensibly very prominent, but is really in the downslope of its run here. And they even call it SRI, but it's the Stanton Research Institute. And the character Don Cody, who is very much, I believe, very much based on Russell Targ, who I had met and spent time with. The whole idea of the breeding program, which ties directly into force majeure. I mean, I always see The Innocence and Exegesis as being a sequel to force majeure.
Yeah, that was definitely the impression I got as well.
Yeah, I mean the eyes and the cloning and so on. Again, I mean, if you're serious, I mean, if you read Visa and you're seriously into the nitty gritty of parapolitics, you're not going to find anything that's going to hit those bases nearly as much as the third season of Millennium. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. I mean, I remember when I first saw, I didn't even see it until I bought the DVD set in like 2005 or so. And I just remember watching it and just being like, "Are you fucking kidding me? It's like they're doing this? Like really? Oh my God, I can't believe they're doing this." It's like really deep, dark, real conspiracy material is just thrown in your face. Again, like we talked about that episode, Collateral Damage, taken straight, the entire plot line's taken straight out of one of these kind of things, these anonymous whistleblowers that were circulating on the internet at the time. I mean, it's the exact same story, but just put into this fictional universe here. So it's just one thing after another, and it's like every single episode is just hitting those bases. And another thing, we talked about Darwin's Eye, but they do that episode Through a Glass Darkly, where it's this whole thing where like this patsy pedo is taking the fall for like the elite pedo, right? Because the whole story is that the person who's actually killing these little girls is his lawyer, and the lawyer is
Oh
using
yeah.
the creepy fucked up autistic guy as his patsy, right? And just like every single episode, again, if you're really into the hardcore stuff, and if you've done any of the sort of the study and the reading, except for the Kiss episode,
Yeah, I was about to say, except for the Kiss
that's
episode, the
pretty
Halloween
piss
one.
poor. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty bad. But every other episode, and there's also that episode of Murder, which is the Christmas episode. But I love what's the name of that actress that I just think is so adorable? What's her name? Keegan Connor Tracy. She plays Lhasa in that. She is just a cute little elf. But anyway, every episode is just going to boggle your mind. It's just you just can't believe that they're doing the storylines that they're doing.
Yeah.
And I mean, they even do a thing with like the Third Temple stuff.
Oh yeah. No, that was a great one too. That's actually, I love the actor who played the head of the cult in that. He played Jakar in Babylon 5. He played a Romulan in Next Generation. Andreas.
Andreas Katsoulis, yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
they're even doing like the Third Temple stuff, and like the Third Temple stuff is really again at that time it's
Yeah,
really
again,
starting to.
it's really relevant again now too.
Yeah, it's really relevant again now.
Like everything else in season 3.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's just like you got to be friggin' kidding me.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
but then they're also tying it in with the that Legion storyline because they do Antipa and Saturn Dreaming of Mercury,
Yeah.
which is just a really great episode. Um, when you talk about like the severed heads, you have in Bardo Thedal, you have the severed hands. Uh, just really amazing, and I love again like what they do at the end. I mean, I don't. Did you have a question about the end? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, we'll get into the end here in a second. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So I'll just wait.
All right, all right. Oh, okay, so let's get a little weird here for a minute. Okay, so the whole storyline of women catching glimpses of a coming apocalypse actually kind of personally resonates with me because I've had a couple of people reach out to me with terrible dreams over the past year. So in a sense, the storyline may be becoming a bit of reality with some people out there right now. Do with that what you will. But I'm just kind of curious. Have you ever had any experiences like that with your readers?
No, but the thing that always struck me about those women is that I wonder if their surname is Fraser. You know, the big
Yeah, yeah.
the
Oh
startling.
gosh, I don't really want to say a lot, but the specific appearance they have too is really eerie to me for a personal reason. Yeah, that just almost yeah. No, I won't even get into that. But
No, yeah, and the whole thing. I mean, even though it's not specifically foreshadowing it, the whole plane crash at the beginning of the storyline. Just it's that whole 1013 thing. Where like so 1013 we just take sort of like a ordinary setup or premise and just fuck your head up. So like there's that whole thing where like the woman's smoking a cigarettes because she's scared, and the lab in the plane, and then the stewardess comes in and she's like, open the door and everything. Like, and she sees the gun on the sink and she like
mhm.
fucking shoots holes in the airplane. You're just like, what? What just
Yeah,
happened?
yeah.
What happened? I remember when I first watched it, I was just like, you just never expected that. Of course, you're gonna expect it now because you heard me say it. But when you're watching that episode, you're just like, you can't believe it. It just freaks you out. And there's a number of things like that. There are a number of scenes like that in this episode. So, but the other thing that because I've been doing some of these guys. There's a podcast called The Time Is Now. It's from Millennium Podcast. I've done some episodes with those guys, and just talking about how I really just, I really thought like they had all the horses running in this episode in this season because they finally got like a good regular cast. They have the assistant director,
I thought Emma Hollis was really a fantastic
oh,
addition too.
phenomenal. And Clea Scott's such a great actress, and she just nailed that character from the fucking jump, man. She just got that character right away, and
Mm.
that just blew my mind because I thought that a lot of the other actors on the series really just didn't. It took them a while to sort of find the characters, but her and then Barry Baldwin, sort of the skeevy frat boy guy, and just that whole dynamic was just so well rendered that just really, again, I mean, I just wasn't prepared for it because I hadn't watched I mean, I'd watched some of the episodes, I'd seen some first and second episodes when they were running on Sci-Fi. Sci-Fi was running like Millennium during the day back. I don't even know when. Back, I think early 2000s or whatever. But I'd never seen any of the third season stuff, and I'd always heard all the the sort of the second season fans think, oh, the third season sucks and everything.
Mm.
But I read like some of the descriptions of the episodes, and I'm just like, oh, I think I need to see this. And then I saw it, and I'm just like, my head was just like vibrating.
Out of curiosity, did you ever see Nowhere Man? It was, I think, UPS. It was on Bruce Greenwood or Greenwald, something like that, is the star of it.
Oh, yes, Bruce Greenwood and Megan Gallagher.
Yes, yes, yes.
I tried watching some of that, and I just couldn't. It was just too goofy for me.
Oh, it did get better after the first couple of episodes, but yeah, I was kind of thinking that was like another one from this era too, where they really, seemed like they delved really deeply into some of these parapolitical tropes that you never really saw addressed seriously in these kind of shows before. To some extent, haven't. I mean, since then.
Well, it's funny because there were a lot of shows that people just don't remember, and Nowhere Man is one of them. But also there was a series that I think Joel Silver did. It was like his X-Files ripoff series. Do you remember that series? Um, I'm going to look that up. Give
It
me a
wasn't Dark Skies you're thinking of, was it?
no. Well, Dark Skies is another one, and that was a horrible show too.
Yeah, that one was definitely bad. Shoot. I'm
I'll
not.
tell you in just a second. It was on very, very briefly, and it looked like it cost like $100 million per episode. It was just like,
It sounds like vaguely familiar, but
I'll
I'm just
tell you in
like
just a
trying
second.
now.
I'm trying to just sort of back engineer it right now. Give me a second here, but go on.
Yeah, no, I remember there was another show I used to love from that era that I had almost totally forgotten. It was called what was it? G versus E. It's definitely like a much goofier take on the whole sort of concept of angels and demons and what have you intervening in day-to-day life. But it was kind of another sort of.
You're not talking about Brimstone, are you?
No, it was G versus E. It was a little Tarantino. It's actually, I think DB Sweeney might have starred in it if I remember correctly.
But the show I'm talking about, the show that the X-Files knockoff, that no, it was Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, not Joel Silver. That looked like it cost like $700 million per episode.
Oh,
It was called The Visitor.
yeah. I do vaguely remember that.
Yeah, I watched that and I was just like, this sucks so bad. It's funny because a lot of people will bust on the X-Files, and it's one of the problems that it just ran too long. It just went on too long.
Yeah. No.
And I think it was Brandon Tartikoff had said that like never let a series go past 7 seasons, and he had like all these kind of very compelling reasons why shows just really kind of just run out of gas after the 7th season. I mean, I think the X-Files 8th season is phenomenal and the best of the post Vancouver era. But one of the problems that Frank Spotnitz said is that it just gets to be like a kind of fatigue that how much trauma and hardship can you put these characters through over and over and over again? People just get tired of it. It just becomes too familiar. But when you see a show like, so you had like Dean Devlin and Roland Emmerich, these guys were like big time movie makers, and they obviously were given a huge budget to do the show, and it's terrible. It's just really bad, and it just doesn't work. And you just really start to appreciate the X-Files more and more because
people kind of
it's hard. It's hard
there,
working this shit.
There were a lot of attempts to do these sort of knockoffs of it during the 90s, and I mean, yeah, they were almost all freaking terrible. I mean, even like the one, it was the TV movie Fox did, the attempted reboot of The Intruders with Scott Bakula. I mean, even that one.
Invaders, yeah, the Invaders. That was horrible.
Or The Invaders,
yeah. But I think the only time The only like I think effective knockoff of it was Taken. Do you ever
Yeah,
Taken?
yeah. I remember Taken. Yeah, that was pretty good. That
And
was
it's
Spielberg behind
interesting.
that one.
What's that?
Was Spielberg behind that one?
Spielberg executive produced it, but it's like
Okay.
basically what they did is they just went out and hired like everybody who had worked on the X Files,
Okay. Okay.
like because all like they hired everybody, because Chris Carter had like sort of like a company of actors um that he would use over and over again, and all of them show up in Taken, and a lot of the people like cinematographers and people behind the screen are involved in that. It's it is even still it's kind of there's a lot of stuff that's very goofy and silly, but that's the problem when you try to take ufology at face value. When you try to do ufology at face value, it just comes across as looking stupid.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I mean,
You can't make effective drama out of it.
I mean, I kind of think that was why. I mean, Darren Morgan really was kind of the secret weapon in some sense, because I think the comedic sensibility he sort of brought that a lot of the other writers would later try to ape was like so crucial to the show working, and it gave them an avenue to even bring in stuff like some of Jacques Vallée's concepts, even, which I think would also be really difficult to do in a purely straight fashion.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, definitely, I agree with that.
All right, so to wrap up, Millennium delves into one of the darkest tropes of conspiratainment, namely the notion that the intelligence services are creating serial killers. Now, this concept gained traction during the Knots with the publication of David McGowan's Program to Kill in 2004. But Millennium was off the air in 1999, a good 5 years before McGowan's book dropped. So it had that going for it, but it also hinted at throughout the show that the creation of serial killers is driven by demonic possession, and certainly fits within the Legion myth arc. Now, Chris, in 2010, when you originally wrote your Millennium series, a sense that that notion would have made you kind of uncomfortable addressing. But in 2020, both you and really as well as myself are probably more open to the reality of demonic possession. Am I wrong?
No, I am, and I'm quite against my will, I must say. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's something that I'd always just been very contemptuous of, and for good reason, because you'd have like all these idiots at these snake handler churches pretending that they're possessed and acting like morons just to get attention. So I would argue that I had very good reason for it. But yeah, I think it was, I don't know, maybe 2014 or so, 2015. I just started to notice that people were people were beginning to act in ways that I'd never seen before. And I mean, at that point, let's say 2015, I'm nearly 50, right? I'm 49 years old, so it's not like I was some sort of naif. I had some living under my belt, and just people just really starting to act and look not right, and not right in a way that I'd never seen before. And again, it's not something that I came to believe with any sense of joy. It's just I didn't I resisted it for a very long time, and again for good reasons, because of a lot of stupid things that people had to say about it. But but also at the same time, I mean, like I had, and ironically, starting enough in 2010, a few months after I'd written the Millennium series, started having some experiences that were, kind of highly unusual. Some of which I've blogged about, and some of which I haven't. But it just kind of opened my eyes up to just a much different dimension to life than I had been familiar with. And one of the things too is that this is really funny, and this is like very Jacques Ballet in a way. But one of the things I blogged about back in 2017, early 2017, is when this friggin' UFO just shows up, you know, over my neighborhood and just is parked there for about 20 minutes, chevron shaped, classic chevron shaped UFO. And, I've got some pictures of it and stuff. Unfortunately, it's very hard to take pictures of things in the sky at night unless you have like a kick-ass telephoto lens, So when you see like terrible pictures of UFOs or terrible videos, it's because it's very, very difficult to do. But anyway, after having that experience, I was like, it just cured me of my UFO obsession, because I got, UFO can be very obsessive to people, and I kind of gotten just like way too into it. And then I had that.
Was that the first time you'd seen one, or was it just like the longest experience you'd had with one?
Well, it's definitely the first experience where I could just say like this is unambiguously, I mean, it was a structured object that did not look even remotely aerodynamic to me. It was a chevron, and oddly enough, I mean, a few weeks after, or maybe even less, like a couple weeks after we had seen it, the same object showed up in like Texas and Colorado, and people were posting video of it. People who obviously had better equipment than I did, but and it was the exact same thing, exact same object. So I'd seen that, and it was making these very, like again, it was just completely unaerodynamic. It had these giant like lenses on the underside of it, and it was making these weird movements, like going straight up, going straight down, side to side, back and forth, just like almost like it was on a track or something, and just making these movements. And I just remember looking at that, and my daughter woke up and she came out and looked at it, and and it was very bright too. And we're looking at this thing, and I'm just like, I don't like that. I don't know what it is. I don't like it. It was just like a real gut instinct level kind of thing. Like, I don't think I thought that, it was like space demons or whatever. I just was like, I don't like that thing. I don't, it doesn't belong here. I don't know why it's here. I don't know why it seems to be parked over my neighborhood for 20 minutes, but I just really don't like it. And I don't, after a while it just went in because, it was just sitting there in the sky, and I didn't want to see it. I didn't like it. It gave me like a bad feeling. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, I just dropped the whole UFO thing like a friggin' hot potato. It's kind of funny, because like you be careful what you wish for, kind of deal, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, so just having like some experiences that just made me realize that even though I thought I'd been open-minded and had like this expansive view of alternate modes of reality, I realized that I really didn't. And it just kind of changed the way I saw the world. Um, and again, I mean, I did not want to sort of come to grips with that, but I don't think I had a choice.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it was 2017 too. I mean, that was also the year of the Las Vegas shooting.
Oh, 2017. My 2017 was just the most insane year of my life.
No,
And
that's just it's interesting.
everybody thought I was going crazy, but it's like, no, I'm not going crazy. I'm just telling you what's going on. The world is going crazy.
No, it seems like 2017 was really a banner year for just a lot of people who are kind of involved in this, in my experience. That was interesting to me. Um, but yeah, was there anything else like about the two-parter? What was it? Goodbye to all that, and the one prior to that you wanted to say here before we wrap up? I know we didn't.
Well, so the thing that I thought was great about that ending two-parter, so you had this kind of complaint about like the first season, that you had all these serial killers. And what they did, and I thought it was just so brilliant, was just they put it all into context, and it kind of almost rescues, like it kind of redeems that earlier storyline that people were getting so sick of with the serial killers. It's just like, well, you're seeing all these serial killers because they're being programmed. You know,
Yeah, no, that's yeah, because I know what you're saying with like the first season where it's kind of like, when you see it the first time around, I mean, it does get kind of repetitive after a while. But yeah, I mean, when you know the entire show and you go back and watch it, yeah, it does put it in a new context, even though, I mean, it surely wasn't intended at the time. But I mean, it just, I don't know, it seems like a lot of it does work on a kind of synchronistic level. And then especially with the Legion storyline, which, some of the earlier episodes, like the Judge one, can really be tied into. So, yeah, it's just, that's one of the most astounding things about this show is, I mean, how many things they got so right, even, unintentionally, so many times.
yeah, it really is. And I don't think it's aged.
No,
You
yes.
can
If
maybe like,
anything, it's more timely now than ever.
yeah, it really is. And but it's hard to watch. It
Yeah,
really
I
is a
mean, I think
hard show to watch, you
I
know.
just because it is so it's just so close to reality. I mean, like you're sort of saying, I think that's why the X Files goes down so much easier because it does have that kind of fantasy element to it almost, and the humor to it, and what have you. Whereas, like, because I mean, it does deal with mostly the same subjects as Millennium, and like you're saying, there's even the kind of mini Millennium episodes that were present in the X Files. I mean, especially the really Scully centric ones dealing with their Catholic faith and so forth. But yeah, it's just Millennium, you don't have that gloss over it. I mean, it's just raw. I mean, there's no sugarcoating it. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to deal with it in a lot of cases.
Well, it is, and it's like I have this theory, right? I don't know if I've discussed this theory with you. So my theory is that the X Files is not about what people think the X Files is about. So the X Files, people think it's about like these two sexy young FBI agents cracking paranormal crimes. See, I think what it's about, and I can show you exactly. I could spell out step by step why I think it's about it, and knowing how Chris Carter's minds work, what a strange duty is, it's very possible that this is what he envisioned all along. But I think it's about these two FBI agents that are being mind controlled to assassinate, people who've escaped from these genetic engineering programs. So, like, so here's the premise. So there's this genetic engineering program going on to create superhumans and so on, like a master race kind of deal. But, the science just isn't fixed. And they're trying all these things, mixing with, like what you see now where they goats and spiders and all this kind of shit.
Mhm.
So they're doing all these like weird experiments. And a lot of times the people, the test subjects get out into the wild and they need to be assassinated. So Scully and Mulder are mind controlled. They're programmed to believe that they're chasing aliens and werewolves and just all these monsters. But really, what they're chasing are the test subjects that escaped from this genetic engineering program. So, but at the same time, they're both being used to as part of the experiment. As part of the it's kind of like the theories about Blade Runner that Rick Deckard was actually a replicant, right? So they're actually they're part of the program. And this is explicitly seen throughout the series that they're abducted and genetic material is abstracted from them. So they're both being used to create this super ubermensch kind of character or race or whatever. But at the same time, they're being programmed to assassinate and eliminate, you know, people who've been involved in the program and have either escaped or whatever.
Well, I think
So
it's kind of funny too because there's even some hints, that they're in the or at least some kind of jokes, I guess, maybe throughout the show about them being too genetically perfect and what have you. I mean,
yes,
especially.
there is. Yes, exactly. So but there's also like, look how often they end up in the hospital.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? But so you think, oh, this is just one step too far for crazy fan
Well,
theories.
even like you were kind of saying too, just all of the trauma that they experience over the course of the seasons, and I mean, you know how Sputnik was like kind of arguing it's hard to like rationalize that, and yeah, I mean, most normal people to keep going through that, they would have walked away long ago, but they keep coming back for more over and over again.
But look at the first two episodes. The first two episodes of the X-Files. The first one's about genetic engineering on high school kids, and the second one's about mind control. And
Yeah.
what happens? Mulder gets mind control. They
Mhm.
erase his memory at this kind of Area 51 kind of installation. But the thing, when you look at the first episode,
And then the third one was the Tomes one, right, where they're kind
well,
of going out and hunting, like, yeah, one of
that's
these.
what I'm saying. So, but it's like, so the first two, they're both about mind control because the kids are being mind controlled, right? But they're being mind controlled, but also subject to this whole genetic experimentation. See, but this is what I'm saying. Like, knowing how Chris Carter is just like, he's like the Sphinx. He'll never tell you what he's really thinking, but his brain is so fractal. Just watch those first two episodes. Like, think of what I just said, this crazy theory, and then you just watch those two episodes. Like, oh, because you never see an alien in the first episode. There's no actual reason to believe that it's aliens. We have the local authorities sort of covering up the whole experimentation, and then at the end we have the people within the FBI covering up the whole experimentation. We have the one surviving member of this group that's being experimented on being interviewed by a psychologist who's based on Dr. John Mack of Harvard University. So it's just like, well, maybe that's exactly what it is because again, both episodes are about mind control. And the other thing too is that Mulder at the end is wearing a Georgetown shirt,
Yeah, which is where a lot of the spooks go to college at. Yeah,
but
yeah,
it's also it was one of the MK Ultra schools, and it's where
yeah.
they did the experimentations with memory erasure.
Oh, yeah.
See, you see
Yeah,
what I
no,
mean?
that's an interesting point.
But
Yeah,
so
yeah.
the thing
Well,
that put
also, I think Morris Allen, the head of Bluebird and Artichoke, was a Georgetown man. I think L. Ron Hubbard was too, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, I'm not surprised at all. But the thing that put me onto this is that I just noticed that every time they do a mythology episode, it would be paired,
It's like a one with a psychedelic in it
yeah,
usually.
with like something much more explicitly MK Ultra oriented. So it'd be psychedelics or some kind of mind control or whatever. But every single time, from the beginning of the series to the absolute end of the series, mind control and the mythology are always paired.
And
And
it's
if you
really
don't believe me, just go through.
no, I mean, I've been looking at that for a couple, for a while now since you had brought that up. I mean, in your blogs a couple of years ago. But I mean, yeah, and I was just thinking, I mean, it's even more direct, really, in Millennium. I mean, obviously, we've been talking about the creation of the serial killers. I mean, the genetic. I mean, obviously, it kind of seems like in force majeure, and then later when the remote viewing ones. I mean, specifically, these were groups that had been bred as part of these programs. And I mean, even in the case of Frank, obviously, it's kind of later revealed that he has some kind of gift, which Jordan later picks up. So, I mean, you can even kind of wonder as part of the reason why the group is interested in him in the first place is because they have, fixated upon him as being one of these specific human beings that they're interested in because they think they have some kind of genetic anomaly or something like that that can be passed down through bloodlines. So, yeah, I mean, that's definitely really interesting.
But you just like I said, it's the entire series, and
Mm,
it, you know, at first I noticed the more obvious thing were the hallucinogens, but then I just really got down to it and just said, well, okay, so let's just say like the hallucinogens are coming from Wasson and MK Ultra and all that kind of thing, right? And Lily and Puharich,
mm.
you're with me,
Oh, yeah.
right? So, well, let's just expand the palette a bit more. So let's just not do the hallucinogens, but also, any form of mind control. And like once
Like we're
you
seeing
do
like
that,
the subliminal messaging and that type of thing. And yeah.
yeah, that's right before that whole thing with the genetics, that whole thing with the clones, the clones. Oh my god, it never ends.
Yeah.
It's just so funny. But just like the fact that they always end up when they have these encounters with all this shit, they always end up in the hospital. It's like, the joke I tell like X-Files fans now is like they're just going in for a rinse, It's like they go into and the whole thing with like Fort Marlene, which is supposed to be Fort Dietrich, Marlene Dietrich, right?
Oh,
so
okay.
so the whole thing with like Fort Marlene, and that's and what's when we first see Fort Marlene in the Erlenmeyer flask, which has the the genetic material for the hybrids. That whole thing with the fetus and the cryogenically frozen fetus and so on.
Mm.
So yeah, I just knowing how that guy's mind works and just like it's just so weird and fractal and just yeah, I hate when people just anytime Trump says something stupid, everybody says he's playing fifth dimensional chess or just said something stupid. But I really think that Chris Carter is like literally playing fifth dimensional chess because I think he kind of downplays it, but I think he like just took so much acid that it just I think it just blew his brains open. And the funny thing is too is that like so Anasazi, which is the great three-parter, which is all about like this whole thing with the smallpox and
Oh yeah, yeah,
and all the sort of Holocaust parallels that they're drawing. Chris Carter got the idea from that because at the end of the first season, he went out to Sedona and took peyote with the Navajo. Like he took part in a peyote ritual. And he's always been very open about that. So it's just like, how many other fucking television producers can you think of who just talk about how they, particularly in that time period, like in the early 90s, who just blithely tell you about how they, took peyote with a bunch of Navajo and that, gave them story ideas.
yeah.
So anyway, I just, I don't know, man. But his brother's at MIT, right? You knew that
Oh no, I didn't know that.
yeah, his brother Greg, or is it Craig? It's either Greg or Craig, is um is on the faculty at MIT.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, there you go, and that's tying into your recent work with the whole Epstein thing, right? Because Epstein
Yeah,
was all up
yeah,
in those
yeah.
things,
Just all that, and I mean the weird,
with Minsky
search.
and who's that guy who just had to quit at MIT, the computer guy, because
Oh yeah, I know who you're talking about, but I can't remember.
something kind of like slovenly nerdy guy. But anyway,
Well, it's also interesting just that Epstein's whole involvement at the Media Lab, because then that actually ties back into like Stuart Brand as well, and like that whole kind of group with the whole Earth catalog and all that stuff too. It's just
well, I'll tell you something. This is something really interesting too, and this is something I sort of talked about a few years ago. My grandfather was involved with MIT, with Lincoln Labs, and then the people from Lincoln Labs started MITRE. You know about MITRE, right?
I believe so. How's the last name spelled?
MITER, MITRE.
Oh yeah.
And it's funny because in the Jack um the Tom Clancy what is it, Jack Ryan books, his cover is that he works for MITRE.
Oh
So
yeah.
MITRE is a really interesting company. So my grandfather worked for Lincoln Labs, and he was a Harvard grad, and then he worked for Lincoln Labs, and then he went to work for MITRE, and he worked on the Whirlwind computer, but he also worked on over the horizon radar. He worked on the SAGE program, and the SAGE program, you probably know this, is the basis for the whole Montauk mythos.
Yeah, and I remember you writing about that.
Yeah, because the Camp Hero was a SAGE installation. So I the point of this is that I always found it interesting that Mulder is from Massachusetts originally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
And
I could see
he's
that.
not only from Massachusetts, but he's from Martha's Vineyard, right?
Yeah, yeah, that which was where a
Somewhat.
lot of intelligence officers used to like have summer homes and what have you at, if I remember
Used
correctly.
to, used to,
Oh, they still okay,
used to.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think used to is probably stretching it a little. But I just always, I always found that really interesting because it's like I kind of knew about that world. I kind of had like um, you know consciousness of that through my family and everything. But anyway, so definitely watch season 3 of Millennium. You will not regret it. It's so good. Um, anybody who's into you and anybody who's into Vicep is just gonna fucking love it. Believe me.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really
I mean, it's
unbelievable.
basically like the Vicep TV.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's just like if you took Vicep and made a television drama out of it, it would be season 3 of Millennium, pretty
Yeah.
much.
I mean, almost. I mean, yeah, it is really just fantastic. I was actually thinking in some ways it almost makes sense. I mean, if because there's really not too much to pick up with the show. I mean, if you've never even seen it, it almost makes some sense to start with season 3 and then go back and watch the first and second season because it does provide so much more context to the first season, intentional or not. When if you've never seen it before, the first season can seem a little self same at various points.
Well, just again, just be prepared. It's not an easy show.
Yeah, it's
And
very
I think a
dark.
lot of people just don't really have the patience for it because it's
Yes, and
not
I
easy.
mean,
It's hard.
yeah, it's that, and it's yeah, it's also very subtle too. I mean, much more so than the X Files as well. I think. It's like I was kind of hinting at. I mean, you've got like these, really deep occult symbols like the skull and the all-seeing eye in these episodes, but they're not, really emphasized that much. I mean, it's just kind of casual that they show up, and then there's no real explanation for it.
But also the palm tree.
Yeah, the palm trees are another one. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of symbolism that's very prevalent, especially in the third season. That just, yeah, I just love how, I mean, it's just casually there. I mean, it really does kind of, I think, show that the show was definitely intended for people who were, who have more than a passing knowledge for this type of thing. Just, yeah, just to put it mildly.
Absolutely.
Well,
All right. So I think that covers it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it was definitely a great chat on Millennium and all things Chris Carter. It's always a pleasure, man.
Very good. My
All
pleasure.
right.
It's all mine.
All right, guys. I hope you all have enjoyed this one. As always, stay tuned until next time, and good night and good luck.